So we'd like to welcome you to the Candidate Filing and Elections webinar for 2017. We have 97 participants. I don't know if that's a record. Kelli Hopkins might be able to address that, but that's pretty amazing. So before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Scott Summers. I'm the Director of School Laws here at MSBA, and I'm going to be acting as the host for the webinar. Kind of do a couple of housekeeping things. First off, if you do have trouble with audio or if your Adobe Connect goes out, we are recording this webinar, and that recording will be available to you after the webinar is complete today. We will send out a link via email to all those who registered, and you'll be able to access that recording in case something doesn't work for you. Again, the phone number, if you're having some issues, I can maybe try to help you. If it's on your end, I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot, but you can at least try to give me a call on that phone number through the email, and I will try to help you out as much as I can. If you're looking at Adobe Connect, some housekeeping things. Right in the middle are the forms that will be referenced throughout today's webinar, and you can click on those and save those. They are the forms and the policies that Elliott and Kelli will be referencing today. They're MSBA forms and policies, so you should probably already have them, but those are the ones that are particular to this webinar. Also, over to the right is a little, they call them pods, but it's a little box that says Q&A. If you have questions during the webinar, please type your questions in, and I will try to respond to them as best I can. If it's a specific question to your district, I will try to respond to it if possible. If not, I may have to respond to it after the webinar. But if it's a general question on what we're talking about, we'll respond there and probably talk about it live as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kelli Hopkins, who is going to be one of the co-presenters with Mr. Elliott Usher today. There are two attorneys here at MSBA, and so let's get started. We've got a lot of information to cover. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hopkins.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to do the easy part today. I'm going to talk about dates, and I'm going to talk about some of the basic filing kinds of things. So be sure and feel free to type in your questions should you have them. Election day, our next election is April 3rd, 2018. I know you're excited. For most of you listening today, and I haven't seen the whole list of who's on, but filing begins December 12th of 2017. However, if you are any part of your district is in Kansas City, you're going to start on December 19th, 2017. Filing ends for everyone on January 16th, 2018, and your certification to your clerk or whoever your election authority is a week later on January 23rd. I guess I didn't switch slides. Sorry, I was so busy talking I forgot to do that. There, for you visual learners, you now have a visual of it. All right. Another couple of dates that are important, and these have to do with something Elliott's going to talk about later, and that is filing your personal financial disclosure statements. The date you are supposed to have it submitted this year is January 30th of 2018, and the date you absolutely have to have it submitted is February 6th of 2018. Okay, more important dates. For most districts, your board reorganization meeting has to take place 2 weeks, 14 days, and that's calendar days, after the election, and that makes it April 17th this year of 2018. And for urban districts, it's 10 days, which is a little weird because urban districts generally have more voters on higher voter turnout, but that's okay. It is 10 days, so that puts them on April 13th of 2018. Scott, I got an email from Ozark Lisa Neiman that says she's having trouble logging in. Would you send her the, what am I saying? The URL, please. Okay. Somebody is. Okay, I'm just going to let Scott field the questions. I am going to go on and tell you what makes an urban district. Urban districts know who they are. There's only 7 of you, and that would be Columbia, Lee Summit, Independence, Fort Zumwalt, Kansas City, Springfield, and St. Joseph. Those are your 7 urban districts. All right, so before we can take filings, we have to tell people that we're taking filings. Let's see, there we go. We have to advertise. And to advertise, you have to tell them 2 things on the advertisement. And you must publish this advertisement in a newspaper of general circulation in the district. And it doesn't say when. You know, in lots of times, it says, you know, once a week for 2 weeks or something like that. But this statute just says sometime before the filing begins. We recommend about 2 weeks before filing begins. You will put them in a newspaper of general circulation in the district, and that notice must include the opening and closing of filing dates, so you have to give them the dates I just gave you, and the offices to be filled. For most of you, you're going to have a couple of 3-year terms. Some of you might have some partial terms. We recommend that in addition to the required information, you actually provide other information in the notice that you provide to the public when they're announcing your election, and that is how ballot placement will be determined. We'll talk about that in a minute, but there are 2 different ways, and I think it's important for your potential candidates to understand how you go about determining where somebody's name is going to be on the ballot, and the days and hours the districts will be open for filing, and the days and hours the district will be closed. Again, this is a very important part, and we will talk a little bit more about that posting of when your days and hours are going to be closed, and a statement that no filings will be accepted on days the district offices are closed for inclement weather. So, and I assume that's what you want to do. Now, if you want to trudge in inclement weather and open the office, you can. But if you don't, then you need to put that in your notice. Otherwise, you'll have someone else trudge in on a really bad snow day. MSBA form BBBAF1 is a good starting point, and this is what AF1 looks like, and it was also part of your handout. If you fill in that form, you will have put everything we think you should put in the notice. Filing begins at 8 a.m. on the first day, and it ends at regular business hours on that first day. It doesn't begin at 7:55 or at 8:05. It begins at 8 o'clock. Do not let anyone sign up early, and don't be late opening the doors. It will make your candidates angry. When filing ends, that's at 5 p.m. on the last day, which is January 16th. Even if you normally close at 4 or 3, you have to be there until 5 p.m. on the last day. Other times are dictated by your district's regular business hours. Once you publish the hours you will be open and the days you will be open, do not deviate from those published hours. You must follow those. Okay, ballot order. There are 2 ways for determining ballot order. State law allows you to do order of filing by meaning that the first filed is the first on the first one on the ballot, and the second one filing is the second one on the ballot, etc. And that is the one that most school districts use, although I can't imagine why they want to, because that's the one that creates all the drama. But the other one is random drawing on the first day, and then order of filing. So regardless of what time you show up to file on the first day, you draw a number, and the person with the lowest number is first, and the person with the second lowest number is second, etc. And then from then on, the next day on, then you just do it in the order of filing. There are no other options. You can't make up your own filing system. You have to use one of those. They're statutory. Look at policy BBB. If you would like to change your current option, you can contact MSBA for a different version of BBB. Okay, candidates must show up and file. Not the spouse, not the brother. Nobody else can show up and file. There's no such thing as an early filing. You can't have one of your board members who's running for re-election come in and say, I'm just going to file since I'm here anyway. No, everybody has to follow the same rules for filings. Candidates may pick up their paperwork early so they can read over it, but they must sign the paperwork at the time of filing. If somebody's picked up their stuff early and then they try to turn it into you already signed, make them sign it again. There are two exceptions to this, and that would be for people involved in military service who can't show up in person, and for people who, due to a disability of some type, are not able to make it in person either. So let's talk about those two exceptions. They're fairly limited exceptions, but if you're in the military and you're unable to appear in person because you're on active duty, they can file a declaration of candidacy accompanied by a sworn statement of their commanding officer indicating they are indeed on active duty in the military. And the same thing for individuals that covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act that may have a disability. They can file by certified mail if they're unable to appear in person because of a physical disability. In this case, the declaration of candidacy would be accompanied by a sworn statement of the physician saying they're disabled and can't make it. If you get any submissions by certified mail, you cannot accept any you receive before the first day and time, and you can't accept any you receive after the last day and time. So the hours are the same for your certified mail. So make sure your people understand they shouldn't just drop it in the mail any time. They have to actually time it so it arrives sometime in the filing period. You have to record the date and time the mail was processed. This is very, very important that you do that, because if you don't record the time and date it was you received it, it's hard to put them in the right order. And then those people will file in the order that the paperwork was physically received. Okay. If you receive 2 or more on the same day, then the earliest postmark should be first. If you have 2 or more postmark dates that are identical, then list candidates in the order the mail is processed. And if the paperwork is received after your offices have closed, then it's a next day filing. And we didn't just make up these rules. These are actually rules that came from the Secretary of State's office. They have some recommendations regarding how these should be handled. So that's, probably a little more detail than most of you will need, but definitely feel free to call us if you're going to have someone file by certified mail. The law also allows that a candidate who files by certified mail can designate a personal representative. The personal representative does not file the paperwork. The candidate has to file the paperwork. The paperwork has to be received by certified mail from the candidate. However, the personal representative can do they can draw numbers if you do the ballot order by random draw, and they can stand in line for ballot placement purposes. So if the stuff's been mailed in and it's received on that first day and they're in the office, then they can be the person that stands in line to get them on the ballot. And we've included some screenshots of BBBAF 7, which is a form that designates the personal representative, and we have another one sequentially titled BBB 8, and that one is the one that we have them fill out to show that they were designated by the person to serve as their personal representative. I do want to mention, I'll take this opportunity to mention that we, all of our MSBA policies, procedures, and forms are on our website, and you can access all of them. You will need a password. If you don't already have a password for our website to get in the members only section, that's where all the good stuff is. So you want to get a password. It's very, very easy to get a password. All right, required paperwork. When your candidate shows up, you're going to have the candidate fill out the Declaration of Candidacy, BBBAF 2. Then you're going to give the candidate their notice of an obligation to file a financial interest disclosure statement. You can use either MSBA form, AF4, or you can use the MEC form. And you have That is required, by the way. The law requires you to give them that notice. The law also requires you to give them a summary of the ethics laws, which you will receive from the Missouri Ethics Commission. And those are both required by law. So we also have an acknowledgement form, and we have a separate acknowledgement form, and the Missouri Ethics Commission has their acknowledgement at the bottom of their candidate notice form. So either one of those will work for acknowledgement, but I like ours because it's separate. And we keep that. That is our proof that, and they sign it to say, yes, I received these, so they can't come back, somebody can't come back later and say, you didn't tell me this was a law, and I broke it, and if I'd known, I wouldn't have. All right, some optional paperwork you could give them would be a copy of the Missouri Ethics Commission financial interest statement, long form, short form, whichever one. That's listed in the documents over there. A copy of the affidavit to the Department of Revenue, which is Form 5120. That's pretty easy. Again, we've provided you a copy of that, and you are welcome to give that to them. I do want to take this moment to tell you, you do not file that. That is up to the candidate to file. You can give them the form, and in fact, if you have a notary, you can even offer to notarize it when they fill it out, if that's what you want to do. But do not file it for them. That is their job. We will be providing you some information about board candidate training. You should receive that shortly, and you can provide them that information if you choose to. Maybe your board president or your superintendent wants to write a little welcome letter and thank them for their interest in serving the district. You might provide a statement about mandatory training. You will also get information on MSBA's Essential Certified Board Member Training. And then give them some dates to remember. And one really important date you should make sure they have is the reorganization meeting. And if you have any scheduled meet the candidate events, it would be nice to tell them when those events are being held as well. Okay, let's look at the Declaration of Candidacy form. All right, this is the Declaration of Candidacy form. We have actually put on our form, you'll notice there's some statutes there. The 162-291, let's see, there's one down here from 014. That's the actual law where this requirement is listed. And so it's sometimes helpful because every once in a while we'll have someone challenge why that's a requirement to be on the school board. And so there you go, there's your proof. That's where it's required. Okay, I want to talk to you very quickly about what the requirements are. You must be a citizen of the United States of America. You must be a resident taxpayer of the district. Now, a resident taxpayer of the district means they're resident, they live in the district, and they have paid taxes. It doesn't say what kind of taxes. Taxpayer is broadly defined. If they went to a convenience store and bought something, they're a taxpayer because they paid sales tax. So don't get hung up on the taxpayer part. There's another provision for taxes that you'll deal with later. You have to have resided in Missouri for a minimum of 1 year immediately preceding the election. So they may not have been a Missouri resident for a year when they filed, but they have to have been here a year before the election. Same thing with the age. You have to be at least 24 years old. You don't have to be 24 years old to file. You have to be 24 years old to be a board member. So the 24 is again at the time of the election. There are also some restrictions. You cannot have been found guilty nor pled guilty to a felony under Missouri or federal law. Now this is a change from last year. It used to say a federal felony or misdemeanor or a Missouri felony. You also cannot have been found guilty nor pled guilty to an offense that in another state would be considered a felony in Missouri. We do not allow people who are registered sex offenders or are required to register but haven't to run for school board. You have to have filed, or the treasurer of any existing candidate committee has to have filed all required campaign disclosures with the Missouri Ethics Commission for all previous elections for which the candidate was a candidate. And here's where the taxes come in. You cannot be delinquent in the payment of any state income taxes, personal property taxes, municipal taxes, real property taxes at the place of residence that they put on the form declaring their candidacy. If the candidate is a past or present officer of a fee office, this is going to be very rare, then you also have to show that you don't owe the state any taxes. This affidavit must be filed with the Missouri Department of Revenue, verifying that the person does not owe taxes. And here's how it works. The Department of Revenue is not going to contact you and say, we got a filing from this person. They just keep the filings that they get. And then if there is a complaint about the person, they will investigate it. But otherwise, they just kind of collect the filings. They are not investigatory. And this is what 5120 looks like. Okay. You have no authority to refuse or remove a candidate from the ballot or refuse to allow them to file. If they say they live in the district, they sign and say, I swear I live in the district and this is my address. You cannot say, no, you don't. I don't believe you. If they say they'll be 24, you don't ask for some a birth certificate to prove that they're 24. That is not your role, and you have no authority to do that. You just have to take them at their word. So it's very important that you not get carried away with that. The declaration is like the candidate's statement, and if they have lied on that statement, they can be removed, but only by a court. And I think if you'll think about this for a minute, that's really a good thing. We do not want individual election people to be able to say, you get on and you don't. Elections are pretty important, and keeping someone from running for an office is a big deal. So we definitely need to get the courts involved on that. If the district believes a candidate does not have the proper qualifications to serve, the one thing you can do is you can talk to the candidate. You could say, did you notice here that it says you have to live in the district? I thought you lived over on Route J, and that's not in our district. I mean, you can definitely bring it to their attention. If they're purposely lying, they're not going to change their mind and say, oh, you caught me. But if they've just made a mistake, that might help. So you can always do that. And then if you got more people running, it may become an election issue. Okay? If you have more than just the 3-year terms on the ballot, the candidate must decide which position he or she is running for. Let's say you have 2 3-year terms and a 1-year term because somebody had moved out and could not complete their term. So you've got 1 year left on this term. They're going to have to say, I declare for a 3-year term, or I declare for the 1-year term. You can't declare for both because you can't serve in both. So you have to choose what term you are going to be running for. Candidates have to give you a legal name for the ballot. You cannot use prefixes such as doctor or reverend. You can use nicknames, but you must use the legal name as well. So like we've listed here, if the name is Elizabeth Smith, you can put Elizabeth Liz Smith on the ballot, because Liz may be what that person is known to almost everyone else. Okay, I've kind of rushed through mine because it was because we had to mess things up. So I'm going to trade computers with Elliott, and I'm going to go back to my office.
Okay. Hi, I'm Elliott Usher. I am a staff attorney here at the Missouri School Boards Association. I appreciate you guys coming to listen to our webinar, and I'm going to talk to you about financial interest statements and also known as personal financial disclosure statements. These are not the most exciting topics in the world, but they can be somewhat confusing. So we're going to talk about a couple different ways that we recommend doing filing. And so first we're going to talk about the notice of candidate's obligation to file a financial interest statement. The MEC also calls it a personal financial disclosure statement. State law requires candidates, board members, superintendent, financial officers, and a general counsel to provide financial information to the Missouri Ethics Commission about personal assets, family assets, and some business dealings. And this would come, the financial interest statement comes in both a long form and a short form. So there are two different methods. Again, they're the MEC forms, and we're going to walk through how to fill out this MEC form. I've created a flow chart. It's handy dandy. That's a legal term of art. And we also have the MSBA way, which we think is a little simplified and should make it so you don't have to follow the flow chart. So this is the Missouri Ethics Commission notice to candidate. This is a notice that the secretary will give to each candidate, and the candidate will indicate which box they fall under, whether they have to file a personal financial disclosure or whether they don't have to file a personal financial disclosure. So moving on to this flow chart that I was talking about, the first way we think about it is if for districts that have an annual operating budget of less than $1 million or less, the Missouri Ethics Commission does not require you to file a personal financial disclosure. So in that case, you would you would check box A1 on that Missouri Ethics Commission form. And the next question that we'll resolve is, so if your annual operating budget is more than $1 million, $1,001 or more, and the district has a valid conflict of interest policy, or does not have a valid conflict of interest policy, then the long form personal financial disclosure is required by the Missouri Ethics Commission. And here's a note: to be valid, the conflict of interest policy must be adopted every other year by September 15th and a certified copy mailed to the Missouri Ethics Commission by September 25th. So double check your policy. You may have it on the books, but the Missouri Ethics Commission may not recognize it as valid. So make sure that that they were adopted by September 15th and that it was certified copy mailed to September 25th, because otherwise it won't be a valid conflict of interest policy, and your candidates will have to file that long form personal financial disclosure. So on the other hand, if you do have a valid conflict of interest policy, MSBA's policy on that is BBFA, and BBFA requires personal financial disclosure, and it requires everyone to file the short personal financial disclosure. So if you're going to fill out that notice to candidate form for the Missouri Ethics Commission, check box B1 on that short personal financial disclosure and have the secretary collect that. If your personal financial disclosure is contingent, there are some districts that have changed BBFA to only require people to file if they have had certain financial transactions with the district. So if your BBFA policy only requires personal financial disclosure if the candidate has had more than a $500 transaction with the district in the last year, then that short personal financial disclosure is required. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what this candidate means and what last year means, because they mean different things. A candidate has kind of a wider definition than you might expect. So candidate. Candidate is a candidate and their spouse, parent, dependent, or child, or their spouse's parent. And so that a candidate who's had more than a $500 business transaction with the district in the last year, or any business that any of those people hold a substantial interest in that have greater than $500 district business transactions. So that would, and a substantial interest means $5,000 compensation in the last year, or if they own more than 10%, or $10,000 worth of that ownership interest in a business that has had a greater than $500 district business transaction. Now, when we talk about last year, this is where it gets a little interesting. So if you are a new candidate, you would file for the 12 months before the candidacy closing date. So any transaction that any of those people or business that they have substantial interest in have had that $500 district business transaction, so they'd file for that detailing the 12 months before the candidacy closing date. When you're talking about incumbent candidates, they could end up filing for more than a year because they are required to file from January 1 of the previous year to the candidacy closing date. So you're going to learn more about those incumbent candidates and what went on there. So we're back to the big flow chart. If the candidate has not had that over $500 district business transaction in the last year, and the district has adopted that custom contingent version of BBFA, then there would be no personal financial disclosure required. However, when the district does adopt that, it does change how you would respond to a different notice that the MBC will send you, but we'll talk about that later. Are there any questions on this? I know this is a lot of information. It's kind of an avalanche.
Don't have any right now, Elliott, so you're doing a great job. Go on.
I will take that as a vote of confidence.
You betcha.
All right. Excellent. So, moving on, so you either file based on that MEC form and use your best judgment or the flow chart to figure out how to file that, or you use the MSBA policy. BBFA, the stock BBFA policy, we always recommend that the district adopt a version of BBFA which requires every candidate to file, even if they've got nothing to disclose. It's just easier to look after and make sure. It's easier to check all the boxes. If someone's form isn't in, then you know that they need to file. Because if you have that contingent policy that only requires people to file if they have more than $500 business transaction, they have to go through that whole rubric of figuring out, oh, what this, or are my transactions this much or that much. So there's a lot less brain work to do, and it keeps candidates out of trouble. It makes it easier to fill out that required form, which I mentioned previously that the MEC will send. So the Missouri Ethics Commission will send you a list of asking for the required filers. So you're essentially doing the MEC's homework for them. They're going with that personal financial disclosure form. What's going to happen is you're going to collect all of those, and then the MEC is going to send you a list of requesting the required filers. So when we're talking about MSBA policy, I just want to go back and talk about that a little bit more. When we look at option A, this is our stock BBFA policy that is unedited. If the section on board member disclosure begins with all school board members and candidates for school board will file the short form, then you guessed it, everyone has to file the short form. Or for those districts who have changed that BBFA policy, option B, all school board members and candidates for school board will disclose in writing the following transactions if they occurred during the calendar year. So this is the option that only requires those who have something to disclose that they have to disclose. We don't encourage districts to have that specific policy because it does end up being a little less clear as to who has to file. Because when the MEC sends you this list of required filers, they are going to request, they're going to ask you who has to file. And if your policy requires that everyone files, then you just have to write all the names of the candidates on that request and send it back to the MEC. And on the other hand, if the policy only requires those who have something to report, you can return the document with an explanation that you don't know which candidates have to file because you probably aren't aware of the transactions that they've had. So when we talk about MSBA uses different forms, so BBFAF4 is a form that it's a notice to the candidate that they have to file the long form version of the Missouri Ethics Commission. And if you use the short form version, you would use this as a notice to the candidate that they must file that short form version. And then this other notice, it says that by law, the district is required to provide you with written notice of your obligation to file a financial interest statement. However, because the district has an operating budget of $1 million or less, people who are running for candidate in that school board candidate in that district aren't required to file a financial interest statement. Okay, so next we're going to talk about do we have any other questions at this moment?
No, we do not, Elliott. Doing a great job.
All right, thank you, Scott. So next we're going to talk about the acknowledgement form. The acknowledgement form, the MSBA policy and MEC treat it a little differently, but what this does is this is a record of the candidate acknowledging that they've received their notice to file that personal financial disclosure and a summary of the ethics laws. By statute, these candidates must be given these things by the district. And so this is a little insurance for the district to make sure that they've got the candidate's signature on a piece of paper saying that they've received it. So the district needs to keep this form or a copy of the form for record keeping. The MSBA form is right here. This is when you hand those statutes and that personal financial disclosure statement to the candidate. Hand this to them as well and say, please sign this. And on this, and it says, on this date I received my written notice of my obligation to file a financial interest statement and a plain English summary of all the laws over which the Missouri Ethics Commission has enforcement powers. So you want to get the candidate to sign that, and we recommend just making a copy of it and keeping one for yourself, and the candidate can have the other one if they want to help fill up their filing cabinet. Now, if you have the MEC form, that's actually attached to the bottom of that personal notice to candidate. So it's just the bottom part of it, and what we recommend is just making a copy of that, and that way the candidate can have one and you can have one for your records. So now that everyone's exchanged paperwork and disclosed their finances and filled out their personal financial disclosure forms, the secretary is going to have to certify candidates. And the secretary has a deadline to do that no later than January 3rd, 2017. And you will send a notice to your county clerk and your election authorities, whichever apply to you. So generally you're going to mail it, but they like the original documents, so you're allowed to fax the certification, but the original must be received by that election authority within 3 business days of sending the fax. So always mail it. You may fax the original if you're in a crunch. The certification has to include the name of the district, the date and time of the election, any ballot language with candidate names. Make sure you proofread that and get your names correct. Now, the clerk or the election authority isn't going to know your candidates, and they're not going to have had those conversations with your candidates. So you really are the last line of defense in terms of making that ballot look right and making sure everyone's name is spelled correctly. We always recommend that you talk to your attorneys about ballot language, but candidate names, just double check with the candidates and make sure that the names are spelled right on the forms, and give the candidates an opportunity to correct you if you're wrong.
Elliott,
Mm-hmm.
we do have a question. someone's asking, is it okay to give both the MEC and MSBA notice to candidate and acknowledgement forms, or should we just do one of them?
It can be a little confusing if you do both. I don't really see a problem with, other than that, of giving both, but with the policy, we just rely on that MSBA form. So, you're just making more paperwork for yourself, really, because they both tend to accomplish the same thing, and we think the MSBA one is easier to follow. So if you want to do more work, you're more than welcome to. But you can do it. So, but we wouldn't recommend it. Certification of candidates. Let's see, we just talked about that. Our next slide. This happens more than we would like. We get candidate withdrawal. So, withdrawal. Sometimes candidates withdraw before the ballot has been certified to the clerk, and so what you need to do in that case is make sure you get a written and signed statement of some sort from the candidate that they want to withdraw. This should be done with some level of seriousness. If you want to get it notarized, that's even better, just because who knows, somebody might change their mind and say, well, I really did want to run. But your statement wasn't notarized. So the more serious the statement is, the better. But make sure that you have some writing, email, or hopefully a notarized writing from the candidate saying that they're going to withdraw. After you've certified it to the clerk, there has to be a court order to take that person off the ballot. The court, they don't put up a big fight to get those people off the ballot if you requested by February 26th, which is the 6th Tuesday prior to the election, and the candidate would pay the cost. So that candidate's going to pay the price for waiting to withdraw. So moving on, the same number of candidates. So if the district ends up having the same number of candidates as you have slots open, and if the district has published a notice as required by law and the number of candidates who filed is equal to the number of positions, then you don't have to have an election. But if at any point during the candidate filing and sign up process, if at any time you have more candidates than you have positions, the district has to have that election, even if enough candidates later withdraw, making it an even number, because that, we believe, it prevents coercion. It keeps people from, some maybe getting strong-armed into getting off the ballot. So keep that in mind. So when we have the same number of candidates, the candidates will still be sworn in at the April reorg meeting as if they had been elected. Luckily, if you don't have an election, there's no need to certify it at the reorganization meeting. And if you make a statement at that reorg meeting, just detailing what happened, pursuant to, here's some suggested language, pursuant to section 115.124, there was no election for school board directors. The following candidates were sworn in. That way, down the road, you can pick up those records and say, oh yeah, there was no election, so we didn't have to certify the results at that meeting. One thing that districts always frequently have to deal with is write-in candidates. Hopefully you won't have to see this too often, but to be counted, a write-in candidate has to file with the clerk or the election authority by March 23rd, 2018, which is the second Friday before the election. And the exception to this is if fewer candidates have filed than there are positions, then anybody can just write themselves in on the ballot. You don't have to, if there are still fewer candidates than are on the ballot the day of the election, anybody can write themselves in and possibly be elected. But this is not a great situation to be in. So we recommend, it's sort of a year-round process, but you want to always, you know who makes a good school board member, so keep your ear to the ground and recruit people. You still have to have an election if you don't have enough people, and all write-in votes will be counted. And people have gotten elected with one vote, so that is a reality. One curlicue is that if there is a tie, and we did have a tie last year, I'm sorry, this year, the clerk has to hold a special election and the district has to pay for it. Now, hopefully, the people who have filed to run as school board candidates are in a conciliatory mood and they'll agree to draw lots instead. If the candidates agree to draw lots, which I think it's just drawing a paper square out of a hat, then you can get a new school board member that way. I believe I saw a photograph of school board members, of candidates pulling a piece of paper out of a hat for that last tie at a school board election.
Yes, you did.
But the clerk does it, so you don't have to be involved in it. Just keep that in mind. So now that we've resolved that tie issue and rock beat paper, or scissors. Yeah, rocks beat scissors. There we go. You get to the reorganization meeting. You want to get that date on everyone's calendar as soon as possible. If you can't get everyone together, just get the most people you possibly can. And there is that deadline for the reorg meeting. Make it meet as soon as possible. So one thing we really do recommend is try not to make too many decisions between the election and the reorganization. The issue is that when you get, so in this election, if people have elected new school board members, they may have decided that they want to change in the direction of the school, and what might happen is the old school board might try to enact some policies that this new school board might not agree with. So what could happen is that the old school board might enact some policy and spend money getting the machine going on that front, and then the new school board will come in and possibly change something back around and have to spend district funds reversing those decisions. So one thing to think about is teacher renewals, so try to do that in March. So at the reorg meeting, there's kind of a to-do list. You want to certify your election results. If you had an election, you want to give that oath or affirmation to all board members beginning terms. The MSBA policy BCA has the board secretary administering it. And at that same board member or board meeting, you want to elect a secretary and a treasurer, hopefully school employees, and you have to do so by July 15th. Most boards just get it out of the way at the April meeting, and that secretary and treasurer do not have to be elected board members. And you want to vote for a president and vice president. There's often some hemming and hawing about who wants to be or doesn't want to be a president or vice president. But just keep voting. You will eventually get a president, no matter how begrudgingly, but you will eventually get a president or vice president. There shouldn't be a deadlock. After enough votes, someone will finally relent and be the president and vice president of the school board. So, what do you do if you have a parliamentary question? We recommend talking to Dr. Leonard Young. He's a professional parliamentarian, and that's his email address, which I will not spell out, but I'll leave it on the screen if anybody wants to write it down for, I'll leave it on there for an appropriately long time because it is a surprisingly long email address. But Dr. Leonard Young knows what he's talking about and will be happy to talk to you about that parliamentary procedure. Okay, so we got some frequently asked questions that involve some Latin. But so, does the board have to dissolve the old board or adjourn before swearing in the new board? And the answer is no. The old board just goes away. The new board gets sworn in, and the new board just ceases to exist based on statute. We talked about this previously. Can the old board meet and make decisions before new board members are sworn in? They can, but they shouldn't. for those reasons that we talked about. Steering that big organization one way and then the other. Some people might see that it's anti-democratic with that old board trying to get in new actions before they've left. Can sitting members running for re-election turn in their filing paperwork at a meeting? There would have to be, generally no. There would have to be a very specific set of circumstances that would allow for this, but 99 times out of 100, that specific set of circumstances does not exist, so that those sitting members have to turn in their paperwork during the candidate filing time and date when everybody else gets to file. And the last frequently asked question is, do old members have to take the oath again? And the answer is yes, and it's fun to take oaths. It's fun to put your hand on that book and say the oath, and it's a nice reminder of your public service. So the old members have to take the oath again. So any further questions, guys?
I have none. Kelly?
Let's see. There's one here. I've got. Did you answer the one about the MEC? Somebody asked if the Missouri Ethics Commission, when they'd send their stuff, like the summary of the ethics laws, and the truth is I don't know, but they have always made it prior to the opening date of filing before, so I have no doubt that they will make it again this year. And I've got another question, but I can't understand. Mandatory training. Oh, good. Mandatory training. The mandatory training is 16 hours. And the question is, what if a board member has to comply with this rule? Well, you know that you have to do 16 hours of training within the first year for our candidates, and that's what we tell them, and then we give them a list of the available trainings. As far as what happened if someone hasn't done it, the statute has no specifics on it. We have included in our policy that if board members have not finished their training, they can't run for office. They can't be the president or the vice president. Okay, explain the 14 days after election for the reorganizational meeting. Within 14 days of the close of the election, you have to meet to elect officers and swear in your new board members. That's referred to as the reorganizational meeting. Oh, somebody just said they've already gotten their information from the MEC. Several people have. Okay, our policy BBF was not sent to the MEC by 9/25, but makes a statement that all will fill out the short form. Does this mean they complete the long form? Here's what you need to do. If you missed that deadline, I have found the Missouri Ethics Commission to be very forgiving on this particular transgression. You mail that thing in right now, and they would just have to do the short form. Okay, I'm not sure if I understand the difference between the long and short form. We're both attached to the email. Elliott, that one's yours.
They accomplish the same thing. So but only one is required to be filed. If your policy only requires the short form, then that's all they've got to file. Both were attached to the email, and they're both. If you want to click download files. Right here, you'll get them both also, and then you can sift through them and figure out which one. But they're both attached to the email, and here you can download them off of this slideshow.
Yeah, and you don't want to. If you don't have to fill out that long form, you don't want to. That will take you hours, perhaps, to fill out. So it is just something you don't want to do if you don't have to. Okay. Do I send a copy of the minutes with BBFA when sending it to the MEC? Well, it refers to a certified copy. So I think what you have to do is you have to put some kind of notice on there that this is the official copy of our policy, our conflict of interest policy, and send it to them. If you want to send the minutes, that's fine as well.
I would add to that you may also want to certify that it was passed by that certain date as well, if you don't include the minutes.
Oh, good point. If the district bookkeeper is the board secretary, appointed, not elected, does that person need to complete the personal financial disclosure? No, they do not. That was easy. It's elected people plus your superintendent, your chief financial officer, and if you have your own attorney, your attorney. Any other questions? I don't know why all of a sudden I'm the only ones that can see the questions, but...
You just answer them more quickly.
Okay, I think that's it. Scott, take it away. If you have any other questions, it tells you what to do.
Yeah, that's right. Please, and we always emphasize this, if you do have questions, call us. There's our contact information on the screen in front of you, our toll-free number, as well as our email addresses. We respond quickly to these phone calls and emails, and it's always, always, always better to ask first rather than do something and then ask if we did it correctly after you do it. So we're here. It's complex at times, so please go ahead and give us a call or shoot us an email on these. A little shameless promotion here. Available, as Kelly had said earlier, at www.msbanet.org. We have our candidate's guide to running for the school board. All of this information that you saw today on these PowerPoint slides condensed into a readable form, and so it's very good information. We update it every year. It has been updated already for this year, so it's a very good resource for you. All of the information you need is contained in there if you like reading rather than looking at PowerPoint slides. We also have a board reorganization frequently asked questions memo on the website. So we get a lot of questions. What happens if there's a tie? What happens if folks can't make it, etc. Everything that Elliott and Kelly covered today as far as reorganization covered in that frequently asked questions. And also you can find with those 16 hours of training, you can find those training dates, locations, and times. We do that over a year out. We schedule those over a year out. There is always one every month at somewhere around the state. We do a lot of them here in Columbia as well. So use that resource on our website to help you out. We are going to, starting in 2018, do our annual Practical Personnel webinars. As it says, spring is the time for districts to make personnel decisions, and this series of webinars has been well received in the past, and we hope we have some very good topics for you again this year. It's a great way for district staff to stay current on the new laws and best practices. Programs are from 1 to 2 p.m., $45 per webinar, or you can do all for $180. These are the dates and the topics for those webinars. We have employment contracts. We get a lot of questions each year on employment contracts. What is an employment contract? What is a good employment contract? Who should get employment contracts? That's on January 23rd. On January 30th, hiring, renewing, terminating probationary teachers. February 6th, essential training for employees and what happens if you don't receive that. If you follow, and I know most, if not all of you do, the legislation that comes out each year, it seems there are training requirements each and every year in addition to the already onerous training requirements are required by law. So we're hoping to sort through that, tell you what you need to know, how much training you need to have, and when you need to have it. February 20th, sexual misconduct. Unfortunately, that's also a pretty prevalent topic. We're going to go over a checklist on what to do when an employee is accused. And finally, everybody's favorite topic, social media. What happens when teachers and employees text things or tweet things or misuse social media. what are the parameters on that as it pushes up against First Amendment and free speech issues, and what can you do as employers? So we hope you sign up for those, if not one, all of them, because I think they're going to be very good topics for you and very timely information. With that, if we don't have any more questions, Kelli, Elliott, I'm going to say goodbye, and please give us a call. Remember, this webinar was recorded. It's going to be available very shortly after the webinar ends, and we'll send out information on that shortly. With that, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.